Okay, good day viewers. This is 300 Plus Academy, where all we do is exam tutoring, ensuring that you ace your next examination. I am Haminullah Ibrahim Ishola and a fresh graduate of Lagos State University Accounting. So what I have for you today is equilibrium of national income, and over there we will be looking at the aggregate demand consumption function, attribute of consumption function, savings function, and the multiplier. So over the years, we have different kinds of economists. We have the classicalist economists, which are believed to be the earlier economists. Now, the classicalist economists, the likes of Adam Smith, Jean-Baptiste, and others. So Adam Smith, in his book Wealth of the Nation, which he published in the year 1775, he proposed that the economy should be regulated through an invisible hand. He said the economy should be operated based on laissez-faire. That is, let it be. The economy should be left alone and it should be regulated through an invisible hand. That is, nobody should interfere in the regulation, in the movement of all forces in the economy. It should only regulate by itself. Then also, similarly, Jean-Baptiste also proposed that supply creates its own demand, that it is impossible for a certain commodity of goods to be in circulation for a very long time without having an equivalent number of demand for it. That is, supply, the quantity of goods supply cannot be in existence for a very long period of time, that there will be a time when the demand will be equivalent to the supply. So this simply means that for them, they believe that there would be what? Equilibrium without any form of external force. Regrettably, in the year 1913, when there was the occurrence of the Great Depression, the Great Depression affected so many countries in Europe. It affected a lot of businesses that supply could no longer create its own demand. It invalidated the Jean-Baptiste's concept of supply creates its own demand, and undeniably it was very impossible for there to be equilibrium. However, in 1913, a prominent economist who is regarded as the father of the macroeconomics, he published a book on the theory of interest, money, and employment. He said supply cannot create its own demand. According to him, he believed that demand would actually bring about supply, that it is what people are requesting for that would actually that would result into the quantity of supply that the suppliers would produce. However, so he proposed that for this problem to be solved, he said the government should come into the picture, that when the government comes into the picture, they can actually increase their number of spending. When the government increases their expenditure, then one way or the other, this would solve the problem of employment, and the people will be empowered to some extent, and undeniably there would be what we call equilibrium. And he said the basic thing that he emphasized on was on the concept of what? Aggregate demand. And it is very important to know that this government expenditure is also a component of what? Of aggregate demand. Now, what is aggregate demand? We have so many economic agents in an economy. We have the household, we have the business, we have the government, and also we have the external economy, that is other countries that come to transact with the country. Now, aggregate demand basically is talking about the total expenditure that is being incurred by an economy at a particular period of time. Now, for simplicity, it's important to know that aggregate demand is equal to consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus the net export. Now, John Maynard Keynes was the one that proposed the concept of the aggregate demand. And he said, according to him, the consumption is the only largest component of all components of aggregate demand. Now, what then is consumption? Consumption function. But before we look into consumption function, it is important to note what consumption itself is all about. What then is consumption? Consumption is a part of income that is being spent. So there are some certain income that you feel like, okay, this particular income, okay, there's a need for you to spend, there's a need for you to incur some certain expenses. That is what consumption is all about. Now, consumption itself, moving on to consumption function. When we say consumption function, when we even call something a function, we are actually trying to say that it is an equation or a graph that shows the relationship between different variables. And here, when we're looking at consumption function, we are talking about the relationship, an equation that looks at the relationship between consumption and income. So it is expressed as C is equals to A plus B Y. Now, the idea behind this is that consumption basically comprises of the autonomous consumption and the induced consumption. There are some certain kinds of consumption that would not require income, while there are some certain kinds of consumption that would also require what? Income. That is, A signifies that this income is autonomous, it is independent on its own, and the kind of consumption that are attributable to this autonomous consumption are the likes of the basic necessities of life. For example, you want to eat and you don't have money. Because you want to eat, you will definitely find a way to satisfy that hunger. Those are the kind of consumption that falls under autonomous consumption. And for the induced consumption are those consumptions that are dependent on the income basically. So this kind of consumption are, let's say, our wants, maybe probably things that, okay, we feel like there's this desire to acquire this thing. For example, like a car. A car is dependent on what? Is dependent on the income. So this basically is the consumption function, and the consumption function can also be illustrated graphically. So where the x-axis is the income, while we have this, and the y-axis the y-axis is the consumption. So here, to illustrate this is the autonomous consumption and this is the induced consumption. So the autonomous consumption is illustrated, the consumption function graph is illustrated this way, which signifies that when the income is zero, the autonomous consumption is expected to be incurred. That is, the autonomous consumption, even regardless of whether you have income, the autonomous consumption must come into existence. Then the induced consumption is the one that is dependent on the income. So it can actually be illustrated. It can be illustrated so this is the induced consumption, and thereby we have the A plus B Y. So this is the consumption function graph. This is the graph of the consumption function. Now, moving on, it is important for us to note that all of these were actually introduced by the father of macroeconomics, John Maynard Keynes. And John Maynard Keynes also, during the course of writing his book, he talked about the psychological theory of consumption. Psychological theory of consumption. He said man is disposed at an average to increase their consumption as their income increase, but not in a proportionate way. That is, when the income increases, the consumption also increase, but it does not increase to the extent at which the income increase. What I'm trying to say is, for example, let's say you have a you received an increment in your salary. That's more like your income. So let's say you were receiving 1,000 naira before, but your income increased to 3,000 naira. That is a 2,000 naira increment. Now for consumption, for there to be an increase in consumption would only can increase by maybe a 1,000 naira. So that shows that there is no proportionate increase in both the income and the consumption. Income is increasing by 2,000 while consumption is increasing by 1,000. So this is what this law actually explains. And since the theory states that once the income increase, consumption would also increase, but not in the same but not at the same at the same pace. So that simply means that when the income increases, the consumption will also increase. Now, but not at the same length, at the same pace. That simply means that the remaining portion of the income that was not consumed would automatically be saved. So thereby we have income is equals to consumption plus savings. So this actually brings about the concept of savings. But before we look into the concept of savings, it is important to also focus on consumption, where we look at the attributes of consumption function. So how did we arrive at the savings function? Savings is equals to income minus consumption. That means that when we remove the consumption from income, we get the savings. Then how did we arrive at this savings function? We should recall that consumption is equals to the autonomous consumption plus the induced consumption. So this is consumption, A plus B y. So to get the savings function will be the income minus the consumption function, which is A plus B y. So looking at this, we arrive at y minus A minus B y. So bringing them together, we have minus A plus y minus B y. So we have savings function is equal to minus A. Then what is common between these two? We have 1 minus B, then close brackets, y. So here y is common here, then we have B also. So this is the savings function. So the savings function is actually as a result of deducting the consumption function from the income. So that is the savings function. So, and it is just like we have the average propensity to consume as an attribute of the consumption function, we also have the marginal propensity to consume as an attribute of what? Of the consumption function. Also, for the savings function, we also have the average propensity to save. We have the average propensity to save. We have the average propensity to save, APS, and we also have the marginal propensity to save. So the average propensity to save is also a fraction of the income that is being saved, while the marginal propensity to save is also the fraction of additional income that is being saved. And it can also be illustrated graphically. The savings function can be illustrated graphically, just like we illustrated the consumption function. So it is illustrated graphically. Here we have 0, and then we have the income, then we have the savings. So mind you, this is the autonomous savings and this is the induced savings. So the autonomous savings, we have it here, that is below the 0, which signifies that these are negative values, while these are positive values. So the savings function comes up like this, and then we have this to signify that this particular side is showing a change in the consumption and a change in the income. So change in consumption all over changes in the income, and this we can express it this way. So this is the savings function. It has been expressed graphically. So you notice the autonomous savings and the the induced savings. Sorry, and the induced savings. So moving on, we have some attributes. Okay, we have some attributes to savings. We have the average propensity to save and the marginal propensity to save. So the average propensity to save is also the fraction of income that is being saved, while the marginal propensity to save is the fraction of additional income that is being saved, and it is expressed as S all over Y, and this is also expressed as change in S all over change in S all over change in the income. Change in S all over change in the savings all over changes in the income. And also note that this is the autonomous savings, while this is the induced savings. Just as we have the induced consumption here, B represents the induced consumption, and when we're talking about the induced consumption, we are making reference to the marginal propensity to consume here, while for savings, when we are making reference to the induced savings, we are laying emphasis on the marginal propensity to save. So like I said earlier, when we highlighted the formulas for the average propensity to consume and the marginal propensity to consume, we would also solve questions when we are looking at the UTME pass questions. Moving on, we've discussed about the savings function. Then the next is the multiplier. The multiplier, you can say the multiplier effect on the national income. But before looking at the multiplier effect, I want us to understand something. I want us to note that although we've talked about the average propensity to consume, we've talked about the average propensity to save, we've also talked about the marginal propensity to consume, and we've also talked about the marginal propensity to save. So from this, it is important to note that average propensity to save plus the average propensity to consume is equals to 1. Likewise, marginal propensity to save plus marginal propensity to consume is equals to 1. So this can be illustrated mathematically to show that you will eventually arrive at 1. Now, taking note of the average propensity to save and average propensity to consume, when we look at the average propensity to save, it is illustrated as C all over as S all over Y. Then average propensity to consume is illustrated as C all over Y. So by adding these two together, we have S all over Y plus C all over Y. Now, for S, we can substitute the function of S, the savings function here, and we can also substitute the consumption function here. So the savings function, just like we have it there, is minus A plus open bracket 1 minus B close bracket Y all over Y, then plus the consumption function is illustrated as A plus BY all over Y. So the LCM of this, LCM of Y and Y is Y. Then we have minus A plus, when we Y times 1, it will give us Y. Y times minus B, it will give us minus BY. Then we had this plus Y in Y, that's 1, multiplied by the numerator, we have A plus BY. So A plus BY. Now, if we bring everything together, we will end up having minus A plus A, those that are common. Then we have minus by plus by, then plus y all over y. So eventually this cancels this also cancels this, and we are left with y all over y. So y all over y will end up giving us 1. So this validates this equation: average propensity to save plus average propensity to consume is equals to 1. Now moving on to the marginal propensity to save plus the marginal propensity to consume is equals to 1. Also, we understand that the marginal propensity to save is 1 minus b, and the marginal propensity to consume is b. So by adding these two together, we should eventually arrive at 1 also. So 1 minus b plus b. So minus b cancels b, we have equals to 1. So we can see that this also validates this equation. Average propensity to save plus average propensity to consume is equals to 1, and marginal propensity to save plus marginal propensity to consume is equals to 1. So having understand that, then we can successfully move to multiplier. Alright, moving on to multiplier. So when we're talking about the multiplier, we are looking at the multiplier effect. What does it mean when we say when there is a multiplier effect on the national income? Now, when we say there is a multiplier effect, we simply mean that one of the component, if there's a change in one of the components of the aggregate demand, it will automatically lead to a change in the national income. That is, a change in one of the components of the aggregate demand will also result in a change in what? In the national income. And that actually brings us to what we refer to as what? Multiplier. So the multiplier is expressed mathematically as k is equals to a change in the national income all over a change in one of the components of aggregate demand. And remember that the component of aggregate demand earlier said was aggregate demand is equals to C plus I plus G plus the net export. So we can use any of these components. Any of these components can result into a change in the national income. So once any of these results in a change in the national income, then that is what we refer to as multiplier. So it can be a change in the investment, it can be a change in the government expenditure, and it can also be a change in the net export. And also moving on, the multiplier is represented as the constant letter k. It can also be represented as k is equals to 1 all over 1 minus mpc, and also it can also be represented as 1 all over mps. So the multiplier can be represented using these three formulas. It can be solved or calculated using these three formulas. It's either you leverage on change in income all over change in consumption, or you look at 1 all over 1 minus mpc, or you look at 1 over mps. So this, there shouldn't be any problem regarding this. Remember, I told us earlier that mpc plus mps is equals to 1. So to get, this is 1 over mps. To get mps, it is mps is equals to 1 over mpc. So invariably that also signifies that what we have written here is also mps, that is the marginal propensity to save. So when you have this formula, then you can calculate any question or solve questions on the multiplier. So moving on, let's attempt some questions in the UTME past questions that are related to what we've discussed earlier. So question 29 of 2010 UTME past question. Now it goes, if the marginal propensity to consume is 0.7 while government expenditure increased by 150 million, the equilibrium national income is. Remember, I told us earlier that the multiplier can be calculated by using three different formulas. We have change in the national income all over change in any of the component of aggregate demand. So let's say consumption here, then K is equals to change in K is equals to 1 all over the MPS, and also K is equals to 1 all over 1 minus the MPC. Now, going back to the question, they said we are giving MPC as this. So, looking at the formula, we can notice that the case of MPC only appears in the third formula. So we need to get the multiplier first. After we've gotten the multiplier, then we can now solve for the equilibrium national income. So to get the multiplier, we say K is equals to 1 all over the MPC is 1 minus the MPC is 0.7. That's 1 minus 0.7. So this gives us K is equals to 1 all over 0.3, and so the multiplier is 3.3333. So 3.333333. So that is the multiplier, which is a multiplier. But we've not answered the question. The question is to solve for the equilibrium national income. So to solve for this, we already have the multiplier, we have the government expenditure, but what we do not know is the what is the national income. So to get the national income, we can say K is equals to the change in the national income all over change in the government expenditure. So here 3.33 is equals to the change in the income all over change in the government expenditure, which is 150 million. So when we multiply this together, we have change in Y, that is the national income, is equal to 3.3 multiplied by 150 million. So by so doing, our answer is 500 million. So which is our answer. So the answer to this, the equilibrium national income is 500 million, and that can be found in option D of this question. Moving on to the next question, 2012, question 28 and question 29. So this is 28 and 29. So the investment expenditure of economy of an economy changes by 2 million naira, and the MPC is 0.75. So note, we have been given the MPC also. So what is the requirement? Because it's very important, you go to the requirement first. What is the change in income? So just like we did earlier, the change in income, which is this. But before getting this, we have to get it solved for the multiplier first, because what we were provided with was the MPC and we were provided with the investment expenditure. Remember, I said you can use any component of aggregate demand. So I use this just like a sample, change in consumption. So it can be change in consumption, it can be change in investment, and it can be change in government expenditure. So any of the component, whichever one. So moving forward, the multiplier to solve, multiplier is equals to 1 all over the MPC, 1 minus the MPC. 1 minus the MPC is 0.75. Remember that the subtraction of 1 minus the subtraction of 0.75 from 1 is to arrive at MPS. So by so doing, we have 1 over 0.25. So when we calculate this, we arrive at 4. So the multiplier is 4. All right, so we've gotten the multiplier, but we've not answered the question. The first question said, what is the change in income? Okay, this is the multiplier. We've answered this second question. The multiplier is 4. Then what is the change in income? So to get the change in income, then we apply this formula, which is K is equals to the change in the income. What is the change in income? We do not know. That's what we are solving for. All over change in the investment expenditure. So the change in the investment expenditure. So K is equals to, we do not know this. So the change in investment expenditure is 2 million. So 2 million. So by so doing, and sorry, we know that the multiplier is 4 already. So by so doing, when we do a cross multiplication, we have change in the national income is equals to 4 times 2 million. So 4 times 2, so 4 times 2 million. So 4 times 2 million. So 4 times 2 will give us 8 million naira. So the change in income is 8 million naira. So the answer to this is 8 million naira. So we can see that for question 28 the answer to question 28 falls on option D, while the multiplier option question 29, the answer to question 29 falls on option B. So the multiplier is 4 and the change in the income is 8 million naira, which is option D. So let's move to 2014 UTME past question on question 26. So, and the question goes thus: if NPC is equal to 2 over 3 and investment is 100 million naira, the level of national income is. So what we have also been doing, K, which is the multiplier, is equals to 1 all over 1 minus the MPC. So we get the multiplier first. So by getting the multiplier, we have K is equals to 1 all over 1 minus 0.6666, and then moving on, we have 1 over 0.3333. So by so doing, we have K multiplier is equals to 3. So since the multiplier is equals to 3, we can apply this formula, which is to get the national income. We apply this formula, which is K is equals to change in the national income all over change in the investment. So multiplier is 3, as we've gotten it, calculated it here, is equals to change in the national income all over change in the investment. So the investment is 100 million. So final answer will be 3 times 100 million naira. And finally, we arrive at 300 million naira. So the answer to this is 300 million naira. And you can find this in option D of the UTME past question. We've come to the end of this lecture, and do not forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. In fact, invite your friends.